You've seen this moment 100 times without ever being in the room for it. A hospital bed, a machine beside it, a green line jumping along in the dark. The line goes flat. Somebody looks up at the clock and says a number out loud, and the film cuts because that was the moment and everyone watching understands what it meant. It is one of the most familiar images there is, and almost nothing about it is true. Dying is not an event. It is a sequence, it runs for days, and different parts of you drop out of it at wildly different times. One piece of you can be taken out tomorrow, put into a living stranger, and still be working in 30 years. 4 days after the line goes flat, something inside you switches on that nobody expected. And the first part is the one that should bother you because you are doing it right now, in that chair, while you watch this. And before your head goes anywhere strange, no. This is not about the soul, it is not a ghost story, and it is not a gentle metaphor about living on in the memories of people who loved you. Every single thing in this video is chemistry, tissue, and paperwork. That turns out to be much worse. So we are going to walk down your own body with a stopwatch running. From what is happening inside you this second to the last 30 seconds of your brain to the 4th day after your heart has stopped. Some of you last far longer than you would guess, and the final question, who actually decides that you are dead, has a much stranger answer than any of the biology. Start with right now. Not with dying, with sitting there healthy, watching a video. In the time it takes you to read one sentence out loud, several million of the cells that make you up have been shut down and destroyed, not damaged, not worn out, executed, deliberately, by you. The count was published in 2021. About 330 billion of your cells are replaced every single day, roughly 4 million every second. Most of them are blood cells, and by weight it comes to about 80 grams of you, gone and rebuilt daily. You have never once noticed it happening. And the important word there is not replaced, it is destroyed. Those cells are not killed by damage or by age or by anything coming at them from outside. They are told to die by your body on a schedule, and then they do it to themselves. It is called apoptosis, and it is nothing like the mess you are imagining. A cell that receives the order does not burst. It shuts itself down in a specific sequence, chops up its own instructions, folds itself into neat sealed parcels, and puts them out for collection so the neighbors can absorb them without any inflammation at all. It is the tidiest thing your body does. And you can check the result of it without getting up. Look at the back of your own hand. Actually do it. Look at the surface, the very outside, the part that just touched your phone. That layer is dead. The entire outer surface of your skin is made of cells that finished dying days ago, flattened into overlapping plates and packed together into a waterproof sheet. Everything that has ever touched you, every handshake, every person you have ever held, touched a layer of you that was already dead when it happened. You are, and have always been, wearing a dead thing. So the order to die is normal. It is maintenance, which raises the obvious question, what happens to a cell that gets the order and refuses it because some do? It happens in everybody, constantly. That is what cancer is. Not a cell that grows too fast, not a cell that arrived from somewhere else, a cell that stopped obeying the instruction to die and kept copying itself instead. Which means your body's ability to kill its own cells on command is not a flaw or a sad fact about mortality. It is the thing keeping you alive today. Death is a service you are being provided. So hold that, because it changes the whole question. You were never fully alive in the first place. You are a moving arrangement of living cells, dying cells, and dead material, and the balance has been shifting the entire time you have been sitting there. Which means when we ask what part of you dies last, we are not asking about a switch. We are asking about the end of a process that has been running your whole life, that you have never felt, and that does not stop politely at the moment somebody writes a time on a form. So go to the top of the body and the end of the process. In 2017, an 87-year-old man was in hospital with bleeding on the brain, wired to an EEG so doctors could watch his seizures. While the machine was recording, he had a heart attack and died. Nobody planned it. For the first time, an instrument was running through the whole of a human death. In the 30 seconds either side of his heart stopping, one kind of brainwave went up. Gamma, the fast rhythm your brain runs when it is concentrating, dreaming, or pulling up a memory. The researchers wrote that it might mean a last replay of his life. And now the honest part, which everyone who repeats this story leaves out. That is their guess, not their result. One man, one damaged brain, one recording. Nobody knows what he experienced. There is one thing we do know, and it is smaller and much harder to sit with. In 2020, researchers in Vancouver put EEG caps on 5 hospice patients in their final hours, at the point where they had stopped responding to anything at all and played them tones. Their brains answered. Not consciously and not in any way they could act on, but the pattern that means a brain has noticed a change in a sound was still there in the last hours in people who could no longer respond at all. 5 patients is a very small study, and it proves nothing grand. It suggests one thing only, that the room is not as private as everybody standing in it assumes. Which is where somebody always asks the obvious question, so let us take it seriously and look at the biggest study ever run on it. Over 4 years, across 15 hospitals, researchers followed 2,060 cardiac arrests and interviewed everyone who came back. About 2% had explicit memories from the period when their heart was not beating. Around 39% described a sense of having been aware without recalling anything specific, and here is what that is not. Nobody measured a soul, and the researchers never claimed they had. What it is evidence of is stranger and more useful, that the brain can sometimes still be forming memories in the exact window where every instrument in the room says nothing is happening. And if you want proof that being alive is a feeling your brain produces rather than a fact it reports, there is a condition for that. It was described in 1880 by a French neurologist called Jules Cotard, and the patients he saw were not confused about who they were. They were certain they had died. It is called Cotard's delusion. It is rare, and it usually appears alongside severe depression or damage to particular parts of the brain. Patients can insist they have no blood, no organs, that they are rotting. Some conclude that since they are already dead, they must now be immortal and go looking for proof. Their bodies are functioning perfectly the entire time. The machinery is fine. What has failed is the sensation of being a living thing. So being alive is not a status your body has. It is a feeling your brain generates continuously in the background, and it can be produced when it is false and switched off while everything is still running, which makes the feeling useless as evidence of anything. Which is exactly why medicine gave up on asking and started measuring. And once you start measuring, the first thing that falls apart is the number everybody thinks they know. 5 minutes without oxygen and the brain is gone. It gets repeated in first aid classes, in hospital dramas, in every rescue scene ever filmed, until it sits in your head as a hard deadline with a countdown attached to it. It is not a deadline, it is not a countdown, and it is not a rule. It is a rough average measured on warm bodies at normal temperature, and what it is really measuring is how fast your cells are burning fuel they no longer have coming in. Slow the burning down, and the number stops meaning anything at all. In May 1999, a Swedish doctor called Anna Bagenholm was skiing in northern Norway, fell and went through the ice of a mountain stream head first. She was trapped under it for 80 minutes. She found an air pocket, stayed conscious for about 40 of those minutes, and then her heart stopped. When they cut her out, her core temperature was 13.7 degrees, one of the lowest any human being has ever survived, and her heart had been stopped for well over an hour. She recovered, not instantly. It took months. She was paralyzed, and she still had nerve damage years later. But she walked out, because a cold body barely needs oxygen, and a body that barely needs oxygen is not running out of time. Which raises an obvious and slightly unpleasant question. If the deadline is that soft, how late is too late? In 2019, a team at Yale went and found out using 32 pig brains they collected from a slaughterhouse. 4 hours after those animals died, they connected the brains to a pump and pushed a synthetic blood through them. Cells started using oxygen and sugar again. Neurons fired. Blood vessels responded to drugs. 4 hours after death, brain tissue went back to work. And here is what tells you what the scientists themselves were afraid of. There was nothing resembling awareness, and the team kept anesthetics on standby the whole time, ready to shut the brains down if any appeared. 3 years later, the same group stopped bothering with just the head. They restarted circulation and cellular function through an entire pig body, heart, liver, kidneys, and all, a full hour after the animal's heart had stopped. None of that brought an animal back. Nobody was resurrected and nobody claimed otherwise. What it did was move. A line medicine had treated as permanent for a very long time. The border between a living cell and a dead one is not fixed. It depends on temperature, on oxygen, and on how fast somebody gets to you. And occasionally it moves on its own with no equipment and nobody's permission. A team works on a cardiac arrest, everything fails, and the senior doctor stops and says the time out loud. Then, minutes later, with nobody touching the patient, the heart starts again by itself. It has a name. The Lazarus phenomenon, first written up in 1982, and by the end of 2022 there were 76 recorded cases from 27 countries. 10 of them were children. It is rare, it is not a miracle, and it does not mean the dead come back. It means the machinery can take a few minutes to finish, which is why the guidance is now to wait and watch for 10 minutes after you have stopped. So come down out of the head, because the rest of you is on a completely different schedule. Your organs do not fail together like lights on one switch. They go out one at a time over hours in an order that is precisely known, because transplant teams have to work to it. A heart has to be inside somebody else within about 4 to 6 hours. Lungs, the same. A liver gives you 8 to 12. Kidneys stretch to a day or more. And tissue, skin, bone, heart valves can be recovered around a day after your heart stops and still be perfectly good. Every one of those numbers is a piece of you that was measurably alive after you're officially not. Which brings us to the promise from the beginning. There is one part of you that gets taken out within about 8 to 12 hours, goes into a living stranger, and can still be doing its job 30 years later. It is the clear disc on the front of your eye. And the reason is the one nobody expects. Your cornea has no blood supply. It has to be transparent, so it cannot have vessels running through it. It feeds off the fluid behind it and the air in front. It was already living without circulation while you were alive, so when yours stops, it barely notices. The thing that makes it invisible is the thing that lets it outlive you. It is also why corneas are almost never rejected. No blood reaches them, so their new owner's immune system never finds out they are there. Bone is the same story with none of the poetry. Bone, tendon, skin, and heart valves are all recovered late, banked, and used for years afterwards. A single donor's tissue can end up in dozens of separate operations, in different hospitals, in different countries, across a decade. So there is a completely unremarkable paperwork-level sense in which somebody who died last year is currently walking around inside several people who are alive. No mysticism required. It is in a filing system with a serial number. Now the one everybody has heard, usually told in a whisper, usually about a relative. Hair and fingernails keep growing after death. Coffins opened years later with long hair and curling nails. It is one of the oldest and most repeated claims about the human body. It is false. Nothing grows. Growing needs new cells, and new cells need fuel that stopped arriving. What happens is that the body dries out and the skin retracts, pulling back from the base of each nail and from the face, exposing more nail and more stubble than before. Nothing grew. Everything else shrank away from it. Which is a fairly good summary of this whole video. Between 3 and 6 hours in, the muscles start to stiffen. The thing everybody has heard of and almost everybody has backwards. Rigor mortis is not the body tensing up. It is the exact opposite. A muscle does not need energy to grip. It needs energy to let go. The fibers lock onto each other by default, and it costs fuel to unlock them every second of your life without you noticing. When the fuel runs out, they stay locked. You are not stiffening. You are holding on, because letting go was the part that took effort. And a day or so later, as the tissue itself breaks down, everything relaxes again for good. And all the way through this, quietly, you are getting colder. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a steady drift downward from 37 degrees towards whatever temperature the room happens to be at a rate that somebody can measure and work backwards from. Very roughly, about a degree an hour, which is why a hand on a forehead has been part of confirming death for as long as there have been doctors. But it is a bad clock, and everyone who uses it knows that. A warm room, heavy clothing, body size, whether there was a fever at the end, all of it bends the curve. Even the coldest and simplest thing about a dead body will not give a straight answer about when. And then the direction of the whole thing reverses. Up to here, your body has been running out. From here, it stops being passive. The machinery that spent your entire life building you starts taking you apart, and it does not need any help from outside to do it. Every cell in you is full of enzymes whose job is to dissolve things, kept sealed in compartments so they can only work where they are pointed. Keeping them sealed takes energy. Without it, the walls give way, the enzymes get out, and each cell quietly digests itself from the inside. It has a clinical name, self-digestion. And then there is the other population. There are trillions of bacteria living in your gut right now, and for your whole life the relationship worked because you kept them on their side of a wall your immune system was paying to maintain every hour of every day. The payments stop, the wall comes down, and the same bacteria that helped you digest your dinner for decades move outward through the tissue and start on you instead. They usually reach most of your organs before anything else does. Your oldest partnership ends the way a lot of long partnerships end, quickly and from the inside. Their work produces gas, and a lot of it. Over the following days, the body swells, the skin discolors in a branching pattern that follows the veins underneath, and the pressure builds until the whole thing is unrecognizable as the person who was there a week ago. Which is exactly why the funeral industry exists in the shape it does. Every refrigerated drawer, every embalming fluid, every closed casket, and every rule about how quickly a burial has to happen is engineering built around this one process. To hold it off just long enough for the people who loved you to say goodbye to something that still looks like you. And you are not alone for any of it. Blowflies can find a body within minutes, often before any human being has noticed that anything is wrong. They arrive first, they lay eggs, and behind them comes a queue of other species in an order that barely varies. That order is so reliable that it is used as a clock. A forensic entomologist can look at which species are present and what stage they have reached, and work backwards to a time of death, sometimes to within hours, weeks after everything else has stopped being readable. You do not simply decompose, you become a timepiece that other people can read. Everything I have just told you is known for one reason. There are places, mostly in the United States, where donated human bodies are laid out in the open air and watched in every season, in sun and rain and snow, by researchers taking notes. They are body farms, and every person in one signed a form. Their families agreed. It is the least sentimental thing a human being can do with their own remains, and the entire science of estimating time of death, which is to say a large part of how murders get solved, exists because a few thousand people decided that was a reasonable way to be useful afterwards. Now the last promise from the beginning of the video, and it is the strangest thing on the list. In 2017, two researchers did something nobody had thought worth doing. They took zebrafish and mice that had just died, and instead of measuring what was shutting down, they measured which genes were switching on. They expected a fading signal. Instead, more than 1,000 genes became more active after death, not less, and not a brief flicker either. In the fish, some were still climbing 4 days later. Something in a dead animal was still reading the instructions and carrying them out for days. Some of it makes grim sense. Genes for stress, genes for inflammation and immunity, still trying to fight something. Genes for moving material around, still running repairs on a body that no longer exists to be repaired. And then there is the category nobody has a comfortable sentence for. Developmental genes, the genes that build an embryo. Instructions your body used to assemble you before you were born, switched off afterwards and left untouched for your entire life, came back on after you died. For a few days, in the dark, some of your cells started reading the plans for how to make you. And I want to be careful here because this is exactly the kind of finding that gets turned into something it is not. Nobody knows why. The likeliest explanation is dull and structural. The systems that keep most genes switched off are themselves maintained by a living cell, and when the maintenance stops, old doors drift open. So this is not your body trying to rebuild itself. It is not a spark of life, and anyone who tells you it is has skipped the paper. It is a building where the staff have gone home and the locks fail one by one, so doors that were shut for 50 years drift open in the dark. Nothing is coming back. The thing keeping those doors shut was you, and you have stopped. But underneath the mystery, there is a fact that survives all the caution, and it is the one worth keeping. Your genome does not get the news. The instruction set at the center of every one of your cells goes on being read for days after the moment everybody agreed that you were gone. Your heart stops in a second, your brain gives up in minutes, your organs hold on for hours, your corneas last most of a day, your bones keep for a year in a freezer, and your genes are still working on the 4th day. Every one of those is a different answer to the question of when you died. So which one is the real one? None of them. That is the answer, and it is not a scientific one. The line between alive and dead was not found by anybody looking at a body. It is a line human beings drew in a room at a table on a particular day, and we know the date. For almost all of history, the test was simple, because the tools were. Death was when your heart stopped and your breathing stopped, and any doctor could check both with their own hands. That definition held for thousands of years. What it could not do was tell you the difference between a stopped heart and a very quiet one. Which is why 19th century Europe was quietly terrified. Germany built waiting mortuaries, buildings where the dead were laid out and watched for days, with strings tied to their fingers running to a bell in the attendant's room, so that if anybody woke up, somebody would hear it. There were patents for coffins with breathing tubes and bells on the surface. The fear was completely real and completely reasonable, given the tests available. And as far as anybody can establish, none of those devices ever saved a single person. The bells were not solving the problem. They were an admission that medicine could not yet define the thing it was being asked to certify. Then the machines arrived and broke it from the other direction. By the 1960s, intensive care could keep a chest rising and a heart beating in a person whose brain had been destroyed and would never recover. The old test said those patients were alive. Everybody at the bedside could see something was wrong with that answer, and nobody had a better one. So on the 5th of August 1968, a committee at Harvard Medical School published a short paper proposing a second definition. If the whole brain is irreversibly gone, the person is dead, machines or no machines. That paper is why brain death exists as a legal fact today in almost every country on Earth. And they wrote down their reasons. One was the mercy of not keeping families at a bedside for months. Another, stated openly in the report, was that the change would make organs available for transplant. Be fair about that. Brain death is not fake. Nobody was declared dead to be harvested, and the criteria are strict. It only means the most important definition in medicine was written by people with more than one thing on their minds, and it has been argued about ever since. And you can see it is unsettled, because the line sits in different places depending on where you are standing. In the United States, the standard is whole brain death. Everything, including the stem, has to be gone. In the United Kingdom, it is brain stem death. If the stem is irreversibly destroyed, that is sufficient. Which means there are people who would be legally dead in one country and legally alive in another at the same moment with the same scan. So go back to that hospital room from the beginning. The flat green line, the machine, the doctor looking up at the clock, everything in that image is real. The reading is real. The grief in the room is real. The only thing that was ever fictional is the idea that the line is telling you when you died. It is telling you when we agreed to stop counting. You do not die all at once. You die in stages, over days, in an order. And by the time the last of you is finished, a stranger may already be seeing through your eyes. Tell me in the comments which part surprised you most. For me, it is the genes, and it is not close. And if you want the other things your body is doing that nobody warned you about, that video is on the screen now.